And welcome back. And there you have just seen two newly launched public service announcements that are tackling an issue that we really don't talk about enough, and that is sexual violence. So we have with us to discuss this particular campaign, we have Margaret Nicholas, who is the Executive Director for the National Committee for Families and Children. We have Dr. Susan Kasedde, who is the UNICEF Belize country representative. And we have Briana Williams, who's the chair of the Policy and Legislative Committee with the NCFC. Good morning and welcome, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, we saw the two advertisements that played earlier, and I want to talk about the collective approach that is obviously taking place here in being able to bring awareness to this issue. Who wants to start?
Okay, good morning. A pleasant good morning to our TV viewers, Marlene and your co-host, gentlemen. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here to really and truly raise this issue, a burning and long hurting issue. Actually, some years ago, we did some changes to the criminal code because the criminal code at the time defined rape differently, and I'm sure Briana is going to get into that. And it also did not include protection for boys. And while we are cognizant of the fact that more girls, based on the data, is being molested, we are also realizing that the molestation of boys is an emerging issue and one that needs to be addressed. So in order to continue with our advocacy for access to justice and also for compliance with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, we decided that we will use the public services announcement as a tool to help to sensitize the public to better understand the jargon within the legislation, because, you know, a lot of us don't really understand it.
Yeah.
And also so that people get a sense of what the consequences are, and also to assist the media as well in terms of the issue, and not to dramatize it or to glamorize it as if although it is something that is good to talk about. So really and truly the whole issue is that is what the whole issue is all about. And so with funding from UNICEF, we finally realized having these PSEs. And then of course the Policy and Legal Committee, which is the lawyers, as well as social workers and other NGOs, they really and truly played an integral role in getting the legislation simplified and to a term that we hope that the public will understand, and that we really and truly want them to focus on the issue as opposed to anything else.
I think that's a great segue over to you, Briana, to talk about the substantial changes that came into effect with the legislative reform.
Well, the substantial changes, for example, rape was further defined. It no longer included the typical idea of what rape was. It now includes other aspects of what could be considered rape. The legislation also redefined consent. And what was important was that rape and sexual assaults to include this element of consent, because you would need consent to have sex or these different activities. And what people weren't understanding was that, for example, children can't consent. It's something that I think our society is struggling with and trying to understand, because some individuals feel that, oh, well, she said yes or he said yes, but...
Or he went willingly or she went willingly.
Exactly, and that's not the case. They just cannot consent legally. And that's really and truly what was changed in the section of consent. It's 16. 16 and younger, you cannot consent legally.
You have to, if I understand correctly, and I've heard this being mentioned before, they're saying that at the age of 16 you'd have to have some adult. Is that correct? I've heard that being spoken loosely before, that while you're at the age of 16 years old, you may not be able to consent, but with an adult's knowledge, for instance, you have teenagers who have their mom and dad, they know they have a boyfriend or what have you, and they know that at some point sexual activity may be introduced in that relationship.
No.
It doesn't work like that.
No.
Can you clarify for us then
Right.
what that entails?
And this is an issue for ongoing discussion and work here in Belize,
Right.
because as the law, as Briana rightly said, the law in Belize currently states that a 16-year-old can consent for themselves to sexual activity. What that does, in fact, is it does introduce additional burden on a child to demonstrate that, in fact, they were fully understanding of the potential consequences and what they were consenting to, and it leaves a loophole for exploitation of a child who may not be fully aware of or able to appreciate the consequences, and to manage the negotiation in what may be with an adult a relationship based on differences in power, because that's what exploitation is all about. So the law did clarify the issue of consent in Belize, establishing consent at the age of 16. However, the CRC that Belize has ratified recognizes that a child is any person under the age of 18 and is afforded all the protections of a child under the age of 18. And so there are still gaps, and there's still space to bring the law around consent and clarify that, to ensure that we're not really leaving certain children exposed to violation by virtue of the age that we have defined for consent in Belize.
So clearly, and I know oftentimes this is a challenge for people to wrap their minds around. A child that is 15 years old and 11 months is not capable, or is not allowed under the law to say, yes, I will engage in any sexual activity at this point in my life. They're simply not given that responsibility.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Like you just spoke about, there may be some gaps, and so I'm wondering if maybe you're referring to
teen.
Well, no, marriage. There is a provision that if there's a 17-year-old and she wants to get married, her parents can give her the permission to get married. But other than that, there's no possible way under law that anybody under the age of 16 can consent to sexual activity.
Now this is, I remember when there were consultations for the changes in the law, and there were very, very clear definitions given in terms of rape as well. And I know it was so sensitive. We had the conversation on the show. I think it was with Diana Shaw at the time, with her legal experience. And it was so sensitive, obviously, because you're speaking what some people consider to be crude language, but it is necessary in the court system. And that's why I wanted to ask you that question, Ms. Nicholas. You've worked in the family court system, and I think one of the things that we hear so often is that we need to have the legislation to be as clear as possible so that perpetrators of sexual abuse or sexual violence will be held accountable within the court system. Can you explain why?
Well, the thing is that remember that these are allegations. They're only allegations.
Yeah.
And so if the evidence is not properly gathered and garnered, and the whole evidence of the child that is molested, the whole swabbing, the whole medical issues and so on and so forth, if those are not before the court, that might be one of the reasons why the conviction rates might be as low as they are. Because, it is not sometimes that we don't understand that children are children, and we ought not, we dare not, we should not molest them. But the thing is, if we are not careful, and if we are not particular about ensuring, and that is why the definition of rape and sexual offenses have been even wider, in that it does not only talks about penetration of the penis anymore, but it is more than that, you know, and so that has really opened the door
Yeah.
to in my mind, to get better convictions.
Yes.
Because it is not just about that, but it is about anything else that
It's a violation of the
it's a
child.
violation in all and all. And so I believe that would, in my mind, it would really and truly create a better opportunity for our children to be able to be protected and for us to get some kind of conviction, because really and truly a lot of these cases go quite down the drain.
And to that point that Ms. Nicholas is making, again, these tools, these PSAs, this public service announcements, are intended to just facilitate a discussion, to open the space for a discussion nationwide, a discussion that we have to have. Globally, last year, UNICEF released a report on sexual exploitation and abuse of children, and reported that 15 million girls between the ages of 15 and 19 have experienced forced sex, and in about 30 countries, 9 out of 10 of those girls experience forced sex at the hands of family members, friends, and partners. Only 1% of them actually reported the experience. So the issue about talking about it, empowering girls, boys, families to know and recognize sexual abuse and exploitation and the signs of it, and to empower them to come forward to report, is critical, not just for protection, but for getting better data, so that we can have discussions about the extent of the problem in our
When I
community.
listen to what you're saying, Dr. Kasedde, I think of this idea where you have victims who suffer in silence, and that, as you mentioned, greatly impacts the outcome of any situation. If they don't report what it is that they're experiencing at the hands of persons that they know, then the system itself is pretty much, in a manner of speaking, its hands are tied behind its back if it doesn't have the report that this thing is ongoing.
Correct.
And oftentimes you do indeed find that a lot of these incidents are perpetrated by persons that, in this case, children know or would ordinarily trust, a family member, a friend they've known from, you know, somewhere where they're very familiar with each other. And then the unthinkable happens. And nobody says anything, or the child doesn't say anything because he or she is afraid of what the parent might say, because, oh, this is a trusted family friend, or this is a brother-in-law, or something
Or there have
of
been
that
threats
sort.
made.
Yeah.
Or not only that, sometimes they're not even sure what was done was wrong.
Yes.
And that was really another important aspect of the PSAs, to sensitize it and make it easier to discuss and a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
Because of the topic and the nature of the things that you're discussing, you get very uncomfortable, and the words that you're using. And that's truly one of the things that we discussed at the Legend Poll committee at one of our meetings before we were doing the PSAs, was how can we get this message across without being rude or awkward.
Without making people uncomfortable.
And that's really and truly how we came up with the idea of the animations, because it makes it a little bit lighter and a little bit more easier.
Yeah. My question is, I was sharing with you during the break, I feel that this is a far more pervasive issue than we wish to accept. If we have conversations openly and you speak about how close a victim of sexual violence is within your own realm, we'll realize how serious the problem is. But why is it important for us to talk about it? How will that change the dynamic as to what is taking place within families and homes and to young children across the country?
I think it goes back to what you were saying. Unless we talk about it and give people the language and the support with which to voice the issue, we will never really get a full perspective of the extent of the problem, and so we don't really know where to place our attention as we try to respond and protect. Now, in Belize last year, in 2017 and in 2016, 475 cases of forced sex or sexual abuse were reported to the Ministry of Human Development. 475, 2 years in a row. And again, 9 out of 10 of those were among girls. It would look on the face of it that this is an issue that affects girls predominantly, and that's possibly correct. But what we also know is that they're boys who are being affected and clearly are just not coming forward. So it's important for us to talk about it so that we can get an understanding of where it's happening, how much it's happening, to whom and by whom it's happening, so that we know how to respond. There's just no other way that we can be effective in protecting children other than just getting the conversations out. And that's why the media is going to play such a crucial role for us in Belize in challenging and changing this norm around silence. There's nothing that empowers abuse like silence and protection of perpetrators, and that's what's happening when we don't talk about it.
Another area that you mentioned earlier in respect of 9 out of 10 cases are girls being sexually abused, and that one boy never really comes forward and says, you know what, I am the victim of forced sexual abuse. I think what compounds that entire issue, as you've mentioned before, is the fact that there's a certain machismo that you're expected as a male to live up to. So that the idea of, well, boys shouldn't cry, boys shouldn't complain about anything that has to do with sex because, well, you're supposed to enjoy it, or you're supposed to just take it for what it is and be a man, or man up, as we would say. But it is a situation where you're taking away someone's innocence and someone's childhood, as we would say. And we're telling them, well, just be okay with it, just don't say anything about it, because that's not your place to come forward and complain or say that you're being affected by what is taking place. How does an awareness campaign such as this address that particular cultural notion, if I may?
I believe that in responding to what you have raised, I believe that the public services message will really and truly assist the victim, the reporters, and this whole system. Because I think that it is going to help them to understand the issue. Because a lot of times, because we have mandatory reporting laws.
Yes.
And many times grown-ups don't report, and I mean teachers and other persons who are mandatory reporters. And this is because of some of these same issues. But I think that if people understand the issue, it is not a sex issue. It is a protection issue. It is children being harmed. So people have to see the pain. They have to understand what it does to an individual, not today, but for the rest of their lives. And so we have our students, we have our young persons around us. We must play that particular role. It is a collective responsibility. We all have to recognize what this is all about. And so I think when you look at it, you see what the emotions, what is happening to the child. Because it's all about that. It's all about what is happening to the child. And the thing is your child, it is my child, it is everybody's children. And so I am hoping that through the campaign, through the sensitization sessions that we will have, that it will help all of us, stakeholders and all of us, to start to see the issue for what it is. Because sometimes we don't see it for what it is, as you rightly said. It is your uncle, so your poor uncle, we don't want to get into trouble, so we are hush this. It is my school, I don't want to change the image of my school because, but it is a child that is being hurt. It is a child that is being penalized for no reason at all.
Forced to endure
use
that
the word
situation.
Innocence. That is an innocent child. And that child, as Marlene said, sometimes they're put in fear. So we have to help the children as well as the adults to understand the issue. It is a serious issue. It is not anything to play with. And so the discourse have to continue. It doesn't matter for how long. You know, we can't throw our hands in the air and say, we don't know what's going to happen. We have to continue, we have to push on, we have to trot on, so that people understand issues, so that we have more conviction, so that even the court system understands when these matters come before them, what is it that they're dealing with.
And even the police.
And the police, you know, so that they understand that, let us particularly look at a boy coming before and saying, I was molested, and because, you know, it's a joke. It's not a joke, you know, and so the whole idea is to take this as one of the forerunners, as a tool that we will be able to take into communities and different places, air them, show them, and use them with focus groups to have discussions with parents, with younger persons, and so on and so forth. So it's not just to put them on the TV screen and leave them there. It is to really and truly push them as far as possible as we possibly can.
But this has to be a wider conversation, and I appreciate that we're starting it here because, you know, having looked at some of the reactions to some of the stories that do make it to the news, and what the community responds, and I've always said it multiple times on the show, we have great sensitivity for children up to a certain age. They hit their teenage years, and then suddenly we are judging them based on our adult minds. And it is amazing to see the insensitivity people have towards the victims so often. And that's just teen girls in one instance. If there is a layer of homosexuality to it, it becomes even more insensitive. So we have two things taking place. We have where, obviously, we want to empower children to be able to speak up if they've been abused. We want parents to understand the sensitivity. We need the police to understand the sensitivity as well, and social workers and the entire system that comes in contact with that victim. But then it gets put out into the public, and then people are merciless towards these victims. And it sends a message towards others who may endure it that, you know, if I step forward and say that I went to somebody's house and I was raped, everybody will say it's my fault. So how do we get the wider community to kind of change our own or take a different look at the situation? How do you suggest as to where we start that conversation?
I think an important part to that is really just recognizing that we have to change the narrative. Because if our narrative isn't working right now to get us the result that we want, which is to protect every child, then we've got to change it. So there are 4 key things that these PSAs are trying to say. Number 1, sexual exploitation and abuse of children is wrong. Period. That's one message complete. The second thing, it is not negotiable. The law in Belize is clear. There are consequences, and the PSAs lay out what those consequences are. And it's important that these 2 first messages, that it is illegal and that it is wrong, are clear to children and to adults. The third message for children is that you have rights. You are protected, your rights are protected under the law. Therefore, the question of fear and not reporting, or consequence being upon you, or shame being upon you for reporting, is false. So you have rights, and they're protected under the law. And the fourth message is, for adults, we have an obligation under the law to protect by reporting, by putting in place measures that ensure that children, boys and girls, are protected, are informed, are empowered. The CRC lays out very clearly the different types of measures that will constitute the protection, adequate protection against sexual exploitation of children. So we've got to make sure that we build our conversations about sexual exploitation around these 4 messages. It is wrong, it is non-negotiable under the law, children have rights for protection, and we have duty to protect.
Let me ask one question before we continue on this theme. You speak about the Convention on Rights of the Child. The recognition of a child is 18 and under.
Correct.
Is under 18. Why is it that we have not adjusted our laws to reflect that? For example, there is consent at 16, but a 16-and-a-half-year-old cannot access reproductive health care services without parental consent. So they can choose to have sex, but they can't choose to protect themselves, test themselves, anything. Why don't we have the alignment of the laws in place?
Really and truly, at the Legend Poll Committee, we've definitely recognized this. And it's something that we would like to address, but it takes time, and going through the procedure, the proper procedure, you'll have to do the consultations and all of that. So it's just a matter of time now to get it done, and the willpower, which I think we have, but it takes time.
Mm-hmm. But it does add a bit of, it makes it a bit nebulous when you start to say children, but children starting at 16. What is the precedent in other countries who have ratified this convention in being able to ensure that when we say children, we always mean 18, under 18?
And the experience that we've had on this issue of consent is similar in many countries, and it is a problem. Many countries also have lower ages for example, consent to marriage by a child. The CRC is very clear, a person under the age of 18 is a child and therefore cannot consent to marriage. That is the definition of child marriage. So Belize, like these other countries, has work to do to bring the national law in line with this international standard. And this has been recognized by, as Briana has mentioned, by the Policy and Legislative Committee, and UNICEF is working with the partners in Belize to work towards aligning this. This was also a recommendation that was made to Belize by the Committee on the Convention of the Rights of the Child in Geneva when Belize last submitted their report on this very issue.
Yeah, I think that really we have recognized that. I think if you could recall, we have made some strides, but we do things in piecemeal rather than just one big lump. No? Because we were at 14 at one point, and we're now at 16. And of course, the discourse, as Briana and Doctor has mentioned, is ongoing as we speak. The NCFC also has a Child Protection Technical Working Group, and this is high on the agenda in trying to raise that age to 18. Because really and truly, our Marriage Act says that we can marry when we're 18. But of course, with parental consent, we can do it earlier. And that needs to change, because I think the disparities in the legislation creates its own confusion. So those need to be addressed as well. And I know we are cognizant of the fact that it is going to be a good fight to standardize it, because people are accustomed to doing certain things, and even our 16-year-olds or some of them are comfortable with the fact that at 16 you can consent. But the reality is that you are a child, and hence the reason we need to make sure that things are standardized so that we ourselves, policymakers and so on and so forth, are not confusing the general populace as well. No?
Now, I think another layer of the conversation that is as worthwhile addressing as well is the reporting of these types of crimes. And we spoke about the responsibility that adults have, and there are two types. There's those that you should, and some that are legally bound. Let's look at what stands for mandatory reporting. So if somebody knows somebody's being abused, what is my if I know there is a child being abused next door in my family, wherever, what is my responsibility to say something?
You are mandated by law to report it. We also have provisions in the law that if, for example, you're a landlord and you know that certain illegal sexual activity is happening in your building that you're renting, you're also mandated to report it.
Okay. Do we feel that this is a message that people understand? I mean, how many?
So the PSAs also touch on this issue and clarify that under the law in Belize, anyone who knows of exploitation is required to report. So it's not just people who have a direct relationship to the child who's being exploited, but anyone who is aware of the exploitation that is underfoot or maybe underway is required to report. And so part of the objective of this particular PSA is to make sure that we clarify that obligation to all in the community. But the activities that then are put in place at the community level to support a discussion around that message, those activities are intended to really take that that point, that issue further,
Yeah.
to clarify even further to the community about our obligation, our duty to report as part of increased protection.
So my last question just has to do, I appreciate what you're saying. You're not only just putting an advertising, a PSA out there and hoping people talk. You're going to set up formal systems to be able to have discussions. What are you hoping to be the final result of these discussions, and what communities will you be working in?
Well, we hope to capture the entire country, as we have done with the mandatory reporting regulations, and what we want to continue to do it along with that as well. We are hoping that we will have, that this problem will be alleviated. Because I know we will not eradicate it, because it's not easy to do that. But we are hoping that we are going to have more reports, that more people, particularly young people, feel comfortable enough to report or even to talk about it. Because remember, it is a no discussion issue. So we are hoping that out of this, that the entire country would be better sensitized, that they would better understand the issue, would better understand that it is not about a child just wanting to have fun and games, but that it is a serious health issue, because it is also a health issue. It is a mental health issue. It is an emotional issue. And so we're hoping that at the end of it all, that people will start to say, you know, I need to report. I must report. I have that obligation. That is what we're hoping will come out of all of this. And that in the fact that whether it is your uncle, your whomever, that you will feel so pressed and the urgency to protect, that you will do it and say, it's all right because I'm protecting the child, the adult can take care of his or herself.
I think we can also hope to kind of maybe do some type of culture shift. We were speaking before we started about the fact that most families have it. Everybody knows about it, but nobody's saying anything. And this has become accepted in Belize. So we really and truly hope that we can get the message out there that this is not okay. This is not something that should be happening in your family. So in effect, the culture has changed.
And from the point of view of UNICEF, we are hoping to eliminate it. And we're hoping to eliminate it, we're hoping the same way that we hope to eliminate racism worldwide. The way we aim and work tirelessly to eliminate diseases. And we're using the same approach. We recognize that it is really by getting entire communities to feel invested in and empowered to act, to recognize and to respond to sexual exploitation in children, as they do to racism, as they do to diseases. It's really that goal that that is informing the way that we're working. With the media, we hope that you will join us in informing and mobilizing this kind of community action and challenging and changing the norm that tolerates sexual exploitation and creates the conditions for it to continue. We're hoping that you also help us to highlight those examples of community action that is making a difference in challenging and eliminating sexual exploitation. And then we're also hoping that you work, to support us to tirelessly encourage community members to report so that we get better data, so that data feeds back into the institutions that are being put in place to try and respond, and that we call people to account so that we actually achieve that elimination. We believe it's possible, but we all have to come together on it.
Well, we thank you for coming in and starting the conversation here with the introduction of the PSAs, and of course we wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by the National Youth Council to talk about their Vote Like a Boss campaign.
Okay, let's talk about something that is illegal: the sexual exploitation of children. Or in simpler terms, children being encouraged to perform sexual acts in exchange for money or favors. The sexual exploitation of children happens every day around our schools, playgrounds, and even our homes. Sexual predators are preying on our children. These sugar daddies and sugar mamas are destroying our children, our society, and our future. Let's be clear. Sexual activity with a child in exchange for any compensation, such as money, gifts, food, or other benefits, is a crime and liable to imprisonment for 12 years to life. Anyone involved in the sexual exploitation of children, directly or indirectly, is officially a middleman and also liable to imprisonment for 12 years. Encouraging or even allowing the sexual exploitation of children is a serious crime. If anyone knows of children being sexually exploited, report them to the Department of Human Services at 0800 PROTECT. No more sugar daddies or sugar mamas.
So, let's talk about the sexual exploitation of children, or, in simpler terms, children being encouraged to perform sexual acts in exchange for money or favors. Parents, guardians, children, Belize. The sexual exploitation of children happens every day, around our schools, playgrounds, and even our homes. This is a fact. Sexual predators, even some your children trust, are convincing your children that it's okay to have sexual relations in exchange for money, gifts, food, or other benefits. But it is not. Know that any person who has knowledge and encourages or allows this sexual exploitation commits a serious crime and is liable to imprisonment for 12 years, even other children over the age of 12. Wake up. Your children deserve more than this. They depend on you to keep them safe. Protect them from this disgusting trade and report any persons sexually exploiting and abusing children directly or indirectly to the Department of Human Services at 0800 PROTECT. Children, if anyone touches you or makes you touch them in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable and offers you money, food, gifts, or favors, know that they are doing something wrong and illegal to you. Stay away from them and report them to a trusted adult or call the Department of Human Services at 0800 PROTECT. There are other ways to get help. No more sugar daddies or sugar mamas. We can all do our part. Belize, let's protect our children.